Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's lunch talk. I see people are still joining us, so I'll give everyone the time to enter this Zoom room for this webinar. And in the meantime, I'd like to start with a brief introduction to our SciComm Academy. But first things first, my name is Arno Zonderman. I'm the coordinator at SciMingo. And for people joining us for the first time, SciMingo is a Belgian nonprofit organization based in Brussels, dedicated to helping researchers such as you take their first steps in science communication. And to support this mission, we run several initiatives such as the Vlaamse PhD Cup and of course this SciComm Academy. And in this academy, we offer hands-on training tracks designed to help researchers share their work with broader audiences. For instance, we provide courses in stage presenting, in infographics, in popular science writing, and more. And we just launched our fall program, which you can explore on our website by simply scanning this QR code, and this will take you directly to our program and course page. You can also use the other QR code to subscribe to our newsletter and to stay informed about upcoming courses. Right now, we're offering an early bird discount for the fall program. So if you register before the end of June, you'll get a 20% discount. So if you're interested, make sure to check our website. I'll also add the link in the follow-up email of this talk. But in addition to these courses, we also host monthly online lunch talks on science communication, and we invite experts, journalists, and science communicators to share their tips and insights. And that brings us to today's session, in which Anne de Ron, that you can already see here, will be explaining how you can survive a journalist interview. A brief word on Anne. Anne is a trainer in science and intercultural communication. She has a background in molecular biology, but she also has over a decade of experience as a journalist, writing for outlets like De Morgen and New Scientist. And in that role, she's interviewed many researchers. Since 2008, she's been training scientists through her company called Fish Crow Feed. Before handing the floor to Anne, a quick note, you're very welcome to ask questions in the Q&A tab that you can find below, and Anne will answer them at the end of the session. So, in the meantime, I see that we're with 50 people present. Great to see that many people here. Anne, over to you now.
Yes. Okay, welcome everybody. It's really nice to hear that there's so many people listening. So the topic of today is how to survive a journalist interview. I've been a journalist myself for 10 years, so that's why I chose the title to trigger a bit. You'll survive it, but maybe it is true that you're in a regular day at work, doing research, reading, doing an experiment, whatever, and all of a sudden you get a phone call from a journalist, and usually they want to know something right now. They maybe want to interview right now. So I hear from people when I give workshops on this, they have this fear, or they just feel like, oh, I just freeze. I say, no, I'm not sure I'm the right person. Do I really have the really specific expertise? Maybe somebody else should do it. Or if I would do it, I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong. Or what if I get questions that I don't know how to answer? Or what if a journalist is focusing on something that I think is not really what I want to say, but they kind of judge, or they kind of direct this interview. Or sometimes people say when listening to interviews, like, oh, I feel a journalist is using sometimes unfair questions, or they try to make people say something that they don't want to say. What if that happens to me? Or what if it's framed in a way that I don't like? So a lot of fears often. And what I want to do today in this 1 hour that we have is give you some ideas, some do's and don'ts, mostly do's, a few don'ts, on how to handle these fears, because they're quite, I mean, it's a stressful situation, of course. And at the same time, it's an opportunity to talk about your research. So it would be nice if you do dare to do that and know how to. So for that, there is one thing really to realize, and I'm going to start sharing my slides. So you might think when you're talking to a journalist, this is a conversation between me and this one person, this one journalist. Well, on one hand, that's true. And on the other hand, it's much more than a conversation between two people. It is a very specific conversation because it's for the purpose of not the person you're talking to actually, but for a different audience that's usually not there at the time. Maybe if you have a television interview with a live interview in a studio with an audience, okay, they're there, but they're usually not able to say anything. So what a journalist is doing, and that's the essence of what the profession is for, is to all the time take into account the audience, thinking, what is the audience thinking right now? What would they want to know right now? And so that is actually what the whole advice I have for you is also about. It's also about realizing that this whole conversation is about the audience. And if you look at it that way, a lot of the things the journalist does will become easier to understand, and maybe you can find a way to see them in a different light also. And also you can realize, so what the journalist is all the time doing is reminding you of the audience. And in that way, and this is also usually what happens if you talk to a journalist as a researcher, they're going to be your ally. They're probably not wanna confront you. You're not a politician who just had something happening where you're responsible of and you need to defend yourself. Usually when you're a researcher talking to a journalist, you both just want the story out in a nice way for the audience. So you're allies, which might take a little bit of your stress down, I hope. Okay, so I am, as Arno already said, I give communication workshops for researchers and experts. I do that in English today, but my mother tongue is Flemish, so I also do it in Dutch. I also give workshops on intercultural communication and writing and related topics. So what I'm going to do today, and the first advice is already here, is going to give you a number of advices for what to do when you get this call by a journalist. So the first thing, journalists usually do not have a lot of time. So it's important if you want to build a relationship with journalists, which is another topic a little bit, but it's important that to realize that it's not tomorrow, probably that they would need something. They will need something quite urgently. So the one thing is to try and make time right now. That's also, and probably, of course, you're doing something else when you get this phone call, but it's interesting to see, like, is it important enough for me to make some time now? And at the same time, I want to reassure you, you will need some time to prepare. So even though the researcher will be very encouraging you to do it very quickly, you can still say something like, oh, but what is it about? Get some little information that we'll talk about in a moment. And then maybe say, oh, can I call you back in 10 minutes? Or shall I call you back in 10 minutes? And then I go to a quiet place. And that gives you the time to do a little preparation if it's really totally out of the blue. So that's the first hint. A second one, if you have that little time, and of course, if you send out something yourself, you might be prepared that there's going to be phone calls from journalists, so you can do this beforehand. But once you get a specific question, it's important to find out who is this medium, what kind of journalist is this, and what kind of program, what kind of angle is it? So not to give an interview just in the blue, because you want to know a lot of specific questions. Is it going to be an interview, for instance, for if it's in English, is it for a serious news show from the BBC, or is it from the picture below? Is it for more an entertaining kind of channel that has an audience that is maybe doing other things, and there's a little thing in between entertainment shows? It's a different setting. It's interesting to know. So what kind of audience also, even if you know what kind of medium it is, then this specific program or this specific magazine, what kind of audience is a good question to ask to the journalist, or to do a little asking around yourself. Is it an informative or an entertaining context? Is it going to be live interview? Is it going to be edited later on? Is it maybe just a background interview for a journalist who wants to judge whether some other researchers, some other research, not your own, whether it's interesting enough, or what's your take on it? That's also possible. How long will this interview be? Is it going to be a long talk for a magazine article that's going to be several pages, or is it a quote of 20 minutes that they're going to use? When is this happening? Is it supposed to be right now? Is it going to be in 2 weeks? And is there some time to think about things? Are there going to be other people interviewed? Is it going to be, if there's other people, is it going to be a debate, or is it just a conversation? What angle are they going to use? Also thinking about the medium, some media, especially if they're not professional media, want to interview you. Are they biased on the topic that they want to talk about? What angle are they going to tackle the information from? So this is something to you can ask the journalist a few questions, and you can also do a little bit of your own research. So I would generally say never to give an interview to a medium that you don't know what kind of medium they are. Of course, you need to know. So that's the second advice. Third one. That's people that have done workshops by me know that this is my one thing that I always emphasize, is to think about your key message. So to prepare your newsworthy key message, a key message is in one sentence, the one thing that you hope people will remember, right? And it's something else than a topic, because a topic, I mean, they will interview you on something to do with your field, probably, yes. But of course, there's so much stories that can be told about your field. So the thing is to, for yourself, to bring it down to, for this audience, what is the one thing that actually I certainly want to convey? It's one sentence, it's content rich, it doesn't have to be a quote, a great quote yet. I mean, it can be nuanced. It can be it's a sentence in the first idea for yourself when you're preparing, but you're preparing it, of course, adapted to the audience, which means there's no words in it that the audience doesn't understand. So there's no jargon. So this is a hard question, of course, to answer, but that's why you do it preparing before the journalist is talking to you, or of course, if it's when the journalists also help you, but this is the one thing you can already prepare yourself. To give one example, for instance, a topic can be pairwise learning. Already there is jargon there, and already you feel maybe as an audience like, oh, what do I have to do with that? A key message could be the one that's here. Mathematical models can help medical doctors to decide which medicine will work best for a specific patient. This could be one specific message that you think this is the message, this is my research, this is the message I want to bring to this audience. Now, of course, it's important, especially if you're talking to really news media, that your key message has news value. And that's an interesting concept, like what is news value? It's a little bit, it's something that journalists feel. So it's not exact science. At the same time, there's been research about it. There's one here from 2012 that might be interesting. They show specifically then for science research, they showed what aspects can make something more newsworthy, and what can you add, or how can you decide whether it's worthy to try and contact media also, or what aspect of your message is going to be interesting for the audience. So one thing is importance. It's only one thing. So it's interesting to realize not every important science finding is at the same time very newsworthy, but of course important is an aspect of news value. Another one is surprise. So something surprising often has more news value than something that is just the way we always thought it would be. Usability, of course, something that people feel that is useful for their own lives or for the things they care about. Actuality, what's the reason that you want to talk to people about this today? It's an important aspect, or maybe it's related to something that's in the news already. That's also something that can make something more newsworthy. Then there's the possibility of visualization, which is, of course, for television very important, but also for magazines or for the internet. You would want pictures, or you would want to be able to film something. And also, even if it's like for radio, that there's something people like to be able to imagine what you say. So that's also interesting. And then the last aspect that these two researchers found when they researched what makes something in science with high news value is story. Not if it's a quote of 20 minutes, but if it's a little bit longer interview, it's interesting that there is a story to it. Okay, and so it's interesting to, when you go prepare your key message for your interview, to choose it really carefully. Giving one example, so this was a first draft of a key message of a researcher. Prison seems to have a negative influence on how much empathy people in prison have for other people's pain. Okay, this researcher said right away, but I'm a little bit afraid that when I say this, when I go to press with this, when I go to media with this, that it will give a negative idea again about people coming out of prison, because what this says is that when they come out of prison, they're less empathetic even than before, which gives them a bad image, and that's not what these researchers wanted to achieve. So we worked on rephrasing this key message, repositioning it, and we got to this. I'll let you read it. So here, instead of being afraid that the key message will lead to a conclusion with the audience or with the journalist that you don't want, you already phrase it yourself in a way that really takes control of what you want to get out of it. And of course, this doesn't mean that it will never happen that the other take of it gets out, because that's the thing. Of course, when you give an interview to a journalist, you involve a third party, and you are not in full control anymore. But it does give you as much control as possible. So try to think very carefully what is your key message for this specific audience. And then, and this is the other thing I always show in my science communication workshops, the idea of the pyramid, inversing the pyramid. So instead of first giving a broad introduction of things, which is not what people or journalists want to know, they want to know right away what is an interesting thing that you have to say, what is a key message, or what is a nice hook to that key message. So start with that whenever you can, because if you don't, a journalist might, if you start with the upside down pyramids, a journalist is gonna be, after a while, become impatient, because they will think, oh, the audience is gonna get bored, or this is not what I need to know, this is not what they want to know, so I'm gonna start directing the interview somewhere to whatever key message I think now is interesting. But then you lose control, because you want to be in control of your key message. So start with it whenever possible. Okay. After you know what your key message is, the advice is to prepare a strong quote. You see politicians, when being interviewed, they are very good at that. They always have their quotes ready. So what makes something, so a quote, with a quote, I mean, you often hear that. It's also interesting as an advice to learn more about how interviews work. Like, for instance, on VRT, on the Flemish radio, you have on these interviews, short interviews, also with scientists throughout the day on Radio 1. And if it's important enough, so you get this maybe 2-minute talk with a researcher, and then if it's important enough, in the next news flash at the hour, they will summarize this topic. The news speaker will say a few sentences, and then they will let you hear 1 or 2 sentences or a quote from the researcher. So what are these sentences? How from this 2-minute talk, what is selected then as a quote? That's interesting process to learn, like what happens there. What is attractive for a quote is 3 things. It's authority. It's when you really say something where it matters that you're the expert. And so if you say it, it gets authority. So that's not something the journalist can say like this and this has happened, but then the authority says, and we should be very worried about it. And when I say when you should be very worried about it, it's already another aspect. It's the opinion aspect. So the fact when an authority figure or you as an expert says an opinion, that's also attractive for a quote. And then the third thing is color. And with that, I mean that it's phrased in a colorful way, in an attractive way. I have an example of an interview. I'll during this lunch talk, I'll have one interview for you that I'd like to listen to with you. And there was a quote there at some point. This is an interview from Hans Rosling, which is a Swedish scientist. He's deceased now, so it's a little bit an older interview. I still think it's a really interesting one to have you listen to. And at the interview, at some point, he makes the quote, "News media only care about a small part, but you call it the world." And he uses the colorful element. "You can only choose to show my shoe, which is very ugly, but that's only a small part of me. If you show my face, then that is another part of me." So this is a metaphor to the explicit key message. He says that news media only show you a little part of the world. And usually, as he says it's usually the part that is ugly. Right. So this is where Hugh has been thinking, okay, what do I want to say? And how can I phrase it in a colorful way? And so this is something where he would be quotable on. All right. Okay. We'll get to that interview in a moment. First, explaining you have prepared your key message. You know what audience you're going to talk to and what the setting is. You have your newsworthy key message. You've already thought about how can I phrase that maybe a little bit longer key message in a quotable way, in an attractive quotable way. And then you have, you can think about, usually with research in very often, people will want to know examples to make it more imaginable, to understand it better. And it's also for you an easier way to explain what you are doing. And I put 3 here because 3 examples is often, it's not that it always have to be 3 examples, but often 3 is a very interesting amount of examples to have ready, because if you show only 1 example, if you talk about only 1 example, people might think, or the key message might divert to only that example. And maybe you want to talk about something that's beyond that 1 example, right? So if you show 3, you get the opportunity to show like it's an array of things, and you can think about which examples illustrate that the best or most newsworthy maybe as well. All right. So this is what actually Hans Rosling also does in the interview that I'd like you to listen to. It's actually an interview in Danish. I don't speak Danish. I don't think many of you will speak Danish either, but of course it's subtitled in English. And I think it's interesting because you see another quote of him, which is actually the quote that was used to show the interview clip. And it's interesting because it also talks about how news works. News is indeed not a summary of the most important things that happened in the world today or something. It's a specific angle on which things journalists choose to make news. News is made. It's not something that already is there or something. So that's one thing. Content-wise, I think it's interesting. On the other hand, I always like to have you listen to this interview because if you're afraid of journalists, in this case, it's the journalist that is a bit out of control of this interview. It's really Hans Rosling himself that's really controlling the interview. And he also does a number of things really well. And during the interview, it takes 2 to 3 minutes. I will be showing on top of the slide, I will be showing what is happening at the moment when it's happening. Now, I like the example. He's a good communicator. He was a good communicator, except as it said there, he's kind of tough on the journalist, which makes your sympathy go to the journalist also. And most people will want to will want to be nicer in the way they speak. You can do the same thing content-wise with a nicer tone, I think. So that's one remark to make. Okay, so I'm going to start the interview, and it's gonna happen right away. what's going to happen right away is that you're going to see that he's going to start with his key message, which is an advice that we already talked about, right?
Använda sig av media om man ska förstå världen.
Det kan selvfølgelig være en pointe.
Man måste ju ha en grundläggande skolutbildning. Och sen måste man följa upp de här grundläggande fakta. Jag tror att större delen av världens befolkning är jättefattiga. Flickorna går inte i skolan, barnen vaccineras inte. Och här är de rika länderna och så försöker de komma dit som flyktingar. Då vet man ju inte hur det är. Man måste förstå att det finns länder på alla nivåer. Och de flesta är någonstans i mitten. De går i skolan, de är vaccinerade och de har tvåbarnsfamiljer. Du pratar om befolkningstillväxt. Antal barn på jorden har slutat öka. Antalet barn på jorden har slutat öka därför att de allra flesta använder preventivmedel. Og det visste inte Danmarks journalister när jag frågar dem.
Men det jeg tænker på, set fra et medieperspektiv, ikke bare her i programmet, men medier generelt, det er jo, at mange medier vil sige, vi rapporterer om verdens tilstand, som den er, og lige nu er der krig, konflikter, kaos, uro og en hel række andre negative aspekter.
Det var ju fel. Du har ju fel, rakt upp och ner fel. Det var ett fantastiskt val i Nigeria. Demokratiskt val i Afrikas största nation. Där en halvduglig regering ersattes av en mycket kompetent chef nu, Mohammed den nya, som får stöd från hela befolkningen. Det fantastiska valet som var i Indonesien förra året. De framsteg som är i Indien. Igår så förklarade vi att Indien nu är fritt från städkramp.
Men Nigeria er fanget i en dyb terrorkrig mod Boko Haram.
Ja, en liten del av Nigeria, inte resten. Nigeria har en snabb ekonomisk tillväxt och fallande barnadödlighet. Om ni väljer att visa, om ni väljer att för mig att bara visa min sko, den är ju jätteful, det är ju bara en del av mig. Om du väljer att visa mitt ansikte så är det en annan. Ni visar ju en liten del och kallar det för världen. Den stora skillnaden, att flickorna går i skolan, att barnen vaccineras, att de flesta har elektricitet hemma, att människor är kapabla och är yrkesfolk runt omkring i världen. Det är viktigt att visa, men det händer så sakta så det kommer inte med nyheter.
Vad baserar du den viden på?
Ja, men det är vanlig statistik som är sammanställd av Världsbanken och FN, och det är inte kontroversiellt. Det här är ingenting som man kan diskutera. Jag har rätt och du har fel.
Okay. Oh, and I closed my screen. So I'll take a moment. I hear Julie is telling me that apparently the interview was Swedish and Danish combined. So thank you for saying that. I'm actually not aware. I hear it's a Scandinavian language. You'll have to give me 1 second because I accidentally closed my presentation. Actually, one of my advices is when you have a problem during an interview, I mean, you don't have to be perfect. It's sometimes, I don't know if you feel sympathy for me now, because you sometimes make mistakes when you're doing things, giving presentations or giving an interview. It might happen. So that can be reassuring that sometimes it helps people. So are you seeing again the presentation, Noah? No? So I think now you are, right? Okay. So we get to the 6th advice, which is to understand and prepare typical questions. So it's really interesting, maybe also when, I don't know if any of you have thought about making their own podcast. More and more scientists are doing that now, which is interesting. Or you really have, as a journalist, an array of sorts of questions that you use whenever it's appropriate. Because this is maybe also the time to say, maybe sometimes people wonder, like, can I ask the journalists beforehand what kind of questions they will be asking? And that's already an interesting question, because yes, of course you can ask that, and it might give you, as what my first or second advice was, indeed, to get informed. So it can give you some ideas about what angle they want to use and things. At the same time, it's not possible. When I was interviewing people, it's not possible to give like the full amount of questions I'm going to give, because exactly an interview is a conversation. And so every follow-up question is a reaction to what your answer has been. So an interview kind of develops as it develops. And yes, I have a number of questions in mind as a journalist. but at the same time, I'm reacting to what you are doing, especially if it's a live interview, because then the audience is there, and then we work really what is happening on time. But even when I was working as a journalist for written media, even then, yeah, you can give me ideas, and so we both work on getting the content out for the audience. Right, so that's one reason why it's not possible to get the full list of questions. Maybe if it's a quote, if you're called and you need to give a 20-second quote, yes, you can ask like, but what's the question that you want me to give that quote about? And in 10 minutes I will have it ready. Even then, you can also get a follow-up question. So that's one thing on this idea, like, can I get the questions? But then, okay. So you know there are going to be questions, what type of questions, and what do you do with specific types of questions. Now, a first question could be this kind, a very open kind of question, like, what kind of research are you doing here? Now, you can, this is like a topic kind of question. You can go anywhere, right? Now, I think I already said that, but it's interesting, if you think of the pyramid, to then kind of get rather quickly to your key message. It's an opportunity. It doesn't have to be this open question, but questions that are a bit general, you can take the opportunity to come with what you really want to say, right? So that's the first thing. Now, of course, you will find that a journalist at certain points of the interview will get more directive. They will ask more specific questions, like, for instance, can you give me an example? What applications does it have? You feel that this is not an open question. This is a question that is directive, and you want to give an answer to this specific question. So remember, the journalist is thinking about the audience. This means that the audience needs more concrete info. Maybe you are talking and it's becoming a little bit too abstract, and we urgently need an example, or we urgently need a possible application, right? Or it can be another question that's going to be more closed, because this is what the audience needs. So it's really helping you to see, like, on what level should I be talking? What kind of information is needed? This is, of course, the most closed question possible. It's a yes or no question. So you answer a yes or no question. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be a yes or a no answer. Maybe it becomes more clear with an example. If the question would be, is this the cheapest solution? It could be that you answer, oh, we don't know if it's the cheapest solution. Or it could be that you say, oh, that depends on what costs you take into account. So you do take that question, because especially in a live interview, once a question is raised, the audience wants an answer to that. And it's also obvious that if a journalist is doing their work really well, then it's a question that's important to have an answer to. It's an opportunity to give your take on that question. But of course, on complex topics, often there is not really, the answer is not simply yes or no. If it is, of course, then just give yes or no and explain further. So that's the yes and no question, the most closed question possible. Now, usually, like the open, more closed and closed questions, they're still questions that people think, okay, we understand, they're fair questions. Yes. Now, then you get a question, for instance, like this. Would you say it's irresponsible? There I see researchers already saying, like, this is like, I don't really like this kind of question. It feels kind of unfair to ask a question like that. This is a subjective question. Now, it's interesting, again, to look at it from this angle of okay. Yeah, I see something in the chat now. Doesn't matter. Okay, a subjective question. It's interesting to realize it can be, if you get into a conversation with a journalist that is really unfair, it could be an attack, but usually it's not. Usually it will be a request to clarify something, and you can see it as that. And even if it would be an attack, still think about the audience. The audience, by this question, you get an opportunity to give your answer to this critique or to this thing. So if you look at it that way, it can feel very different. Another question of this type, let's say the journalist says something like, oh, you didn't think it would take this long. That's a very leading question, a suggestive question. Again, it might take your stress down and your idea that something's going wrong. If you just take it like, oh, maybe this now seems to be the conclusion, but now I'm getting an opportunity to clarify that it's maybe different from what the audience is thinking now. Didn't you just say the opposite? That's even really confronting. Again, there's maybe confusion. You get an opportunity to explain what is really happening. No, yeah, it might, and you can start with, it might seem that I now just said the opposite thing, but in fact, and then you clarify. If this journalist wouldn't have asked this confronting question, then probably your audience is going to be left with confusion. That's not what you want. It's not what the journalist wants. It's not what the audience wants. So it can be a gift to get such a question, because otherwise you're not aware. This is a concluding question. So you say we need to change our behavior. Yeah, a concluding question. It means it's time for a conclusion. Hopefully the journalist is right with the conclusion, but maybe they're not right. Fine. Then you say, well, the conclusion is actually, and then you come with what is actually the conclusion. But you just take it as the idea that, oh, we are concluding now. We were maybe in examples, and now we need to come back to what is actually the key message. Okay. To specific advices on very specific questions, if somebody else is mentioned and you're asked to react on what somebody else did, which was maybe negative, like in this example, certainly don't repeat provocative language. Don't you think, oh, stealing is research, I think is something. No, don't use provocative language, because remember, if an interview is then edited, it might seem that you came up, and there's a typo here, that you came up with that word yourself. You don't want to do that. And also, if there's talk about somebody else, you don't argue with somebody absent. Again, don't do that. Okay. Predictable questions. That's a very important thing to realize, that usually you will get very predictable questions. Generally, what an audience, and thus a journalist, wants to know is, why is this interesting? Why are you telling me this? Why should we know, right? What are you telling us? But then mostly also, why is this important? So that's the thing you're preparing. It's not the most difficult question you're going to get at your PhD defense or at a conference of fellow journalists. It's actually the very predictable questions that a friend also will be asking you. And so you can prepare them while a friend is asking them. And I have one example here, which was from one of the PhD Cup competitions. And so this researcher on the right, the woman, gave a 3-minute presentation about her PhD. And her key message was what is here, that she developed this test to check whether people have a gene defect that is associated with a serious disease that they will get when they're older, right? So she's interviewed later on the stage by VRT journalist Ivan de Vadder at the time. And what question is he going to ask? Now, on the picture, I think if you look at it a bit from the perspective, you can see the researcher is obviously pregnant, right? So when you're watching her for 3 minutes, there is something on your mind, maybe, right? So he is asking, now she has done molecular research, right? So she has not done ethical research, but still a question in our minds can be, would you want to know your own gene defect that leads to such a disease? That's where Ivan de Vadder started. He's going to ask about the baby afterwards. He started here. Now, the researcher, she took a moment to think, which is what you're allowed to do. You're allowed to think for a moment. You don't have to speak like right away. You can think for a few seconds. And I think she was thinking first, do I want to answer this? And then, yes, I want to answer this. And the answer is, yes, there is a treatment. Now, there's a good reason why she chose to answer this, I think, because, well, she was okay to give this personal information about herself. That's one check you make. And She thought about this beforehand, I'm sure. And the answer in this case is relevant because it's more than personal, because it gives us as an audience extra information that, of course, it's very different to know about such a gene defect when there's going to be treatment for what they discovered and when there's not going to be a treatment. So she actually gives extra information. And I think that can be an important motivation to decide to answer this, which is such a personal question, but it gives relevant information. So she answered it. Then the interviewer came with a second question. Do you want to know all that lies ahead in the future of your baby? And that question she chose not to answer because I suppose she chose this. She decided that this is too personal. And she took a very elegant way out. She said, a bright future, I hope, which is a very elegant way to kind of convey, I don't want to answer this question. But you don't have to do that like in an aggressive way, like, I don't want to answer this question. Why? How dare you ask this personal question? You can find an elegant way to say, like, I don't want to answer this question. It's okay to not answer a certain question. Okay. I see a question here from somebody who says, when you're discussing results, it's sometimes a slippery slope towards policy recommendations. How could you avoid this? Or what would be your advice? Well, there's already something in the question that's suggestive, which is interesting. So the first question for me would be whether you would want to avoid policy recommendations or not, because it's obviously something, if you bring your research out to people, and they have to do with something in society that could lead to policy. Of course, it's something people or your friend, when you test it on them, it's something that people will think about. So it's a question that you can expect, and then you can think about, do I want to go that far? Do I dare to go that far to give a policy recommendation? And if you decide, actually, maybe I do, because, and I think it's interesting sometimes that you can say, I would recommend this or that. I think it's a very interesting opportunity to do that, even if you're the researcher, but you prepare it. And if you don't want to answer it, then you find a way out, and you say something like, it's too soon for me to come to conclusions on policy, or I prefer to leave that to the policymakers. But the first decision is really, would you want to do it or not? And what's the danger of doing it? I mean, you can make the distinction between, is it my research? That's my research. And then my personal you could also make that distinction. And the most important thing is this is a question, the policy recommendation thing is a question that you could expect. So you can think about it beforehand. Okay, I come back to 7th advice, which is prepare how to return to your key message. Yeah, because we saw all these different kind of questions. You see that sometimes you can take control of the interview by starting with your key message. And sometimes even then when you do that, or maybe you have a journalist that really starts with a very directed question. And so you tend at some point you feel, oh, we're getting out of what I want to talk about. So then it's interesting in journalistic trainings, we call this like the flower. So you have a key message, which is the center of your flower. You have to know that really well. And then you have a question that might take you out of it. And you don't want to get a follow-up question that's even further out. And then you end up talking about something that you actually don't want to be talking about. And of course, the important thing, of course, is that your key message is something that's really newsworthy and interesting for the audience. And the journalist also agrees on that. Because if the journalist really wants to talk about something else, yes, then you're never going to win to talk about what you want to talk about. So we talk more about there's a conversation going on, and suddenly we go to something where actually you don't have so much to say about. So then you practice on how to get back to what you want to say. And for instance, I mean, this really depends on, and in workshops, we practice this with your specific key message and your specific setting. But it could be something like, if you really don't have an answer to it, it could be like, oh, that's a very interesting question. My research didn't really go there, and we might do it in the future. But what we do know now, and with the what we do know now, whoops, you're getting back to your own key message, right? Okay, so that's the flower on how to get back. But of course, it all starts with the key message needing to be in agreement with the journalist as something that the audience wants, right? That's the condition. Okay, we're getting, and I have 10 tips in total, so we're getting to the end, but this is the 8th one. This is, as I said, there's going to be do's and there's going to be a few don'ts. This is the don't. It's supported. Maybe you felt, on one hand, I try to reassure you about journalists that they're usually your allies, especially if you're just a researcher, just presenting your research. There's no reason to want to attack you or grill you. It's just interview techniques, right? But still, it's important not to be naive either, because it's still a conversation for the sake of a product, of a good media product, right? So you want to avoid saying things you don't want to be quoted on. Everything you say can be used, right? I have one example from here, again, from the PhD Cup. There is one participant in the PhD Cup, I think it was the first or the second edition, and this was her one quote in a video clip that VRT made to promote the PhD Cup. And I think this is probably not the quote she hoped that would be in the film clip for her, right? So they were making footage from the media training, and so they filmed everybody, and she said, oh, you have to tell me if there's something wrong with my hair, right? So you can say this is a very mean thing of the journalist, of the editors to be using. At the same time, the key message of, because a journalist is himself or herself looking for a good key message for their audience. And this is the setting. This is the message of this film clip. There are 16 young researchers. They get 4 days of media training to explain their research clearly in 3 minutes. So we're trying to get the audience to come and listen to these 3-minute talks, right? And journalists are preparing, but they did years of research, and now they have to put it in 3 minutes. Will they be able to do it? They must be nervous. Don't you want to watch it, right? How they succeed or what happens. So in that setting, this quote works. So don't give them things. If you don't want this quote of you, this type of quote, then just don't give it, because it can be very attractive on the other side to use it if it really fits what is the purpose of this media product, right? Okay, so that was one example to scare you a bit, but it's mostly, and you can also, again, train this. You can train yourself. If you feel that this is something that might happen to you, you can train yourself to not say certain things. Okay, and Julie says she doesn't think it's mean of the journalist. So that's nice that at the same time, it's true, it makes you human as well. So that's, as I said before, like when you make a mistake or when something happens, it makes you human, and it's also something that's maybe important on the bigger picture of how we look at researchers and research results. As a society, it's important that these people are people, and that things are ongoing, and that they're not perfect, as nobody is perfect, and so things like that. Okay, thanks, Julie. Okay, so the 9th advice is actually really simple. It's to practice, which I think I've said from the beginning. It's to buy yourself a little bit of time, and to use that time to prepare yourself, not with long lists of text, but with this one key message, with good example, with like, oh, I'm afraid they will ask this question. It's a question they will probably ask. Let me prepare how to respond to that question. Let me prepare it again. Let me prepare it again. Maybe a difficult question. You just keep on practicing. And the one thing I want to add here, practice out loud. Is just like with giving presentations, an interview is almost always talking. It's almost never, I think in the 10 years I was a journalist, I maybe once or twice I put like questions on the email and I got an email back. I hated it. It was somebody, I don't know in which country, sometime that I couldn't, that I really wanted to ask something and it was the only way they wanted to give a reaction. But usually I never do that. So it's almost always that you'll have to talk, even if it's for a written medium. So you prepare talking, because things can be clear in your head, but then you still have to be able to deliver them, right? So practice it out loud and practice it with somebody. In my workshop, I do this. I have people 2 by 2 interviewing each other, which is also very interesting, because if you get to be the journalists for a moment, you also get to feel how it is from the other side, which also gives information on how does it work. So you can do this to one another. Preferably, actually, you do it with somebody from another field, because otherwise you'll end up having a conversation just about the interesting details about your research, which is not what a journalist interview is going to be like, probably. Okay, so last advice, manage your stress. There's going to be stress. It's normal. It's not you. I mean, there is some stress related to this setting of giving an interview and giving part of the control to this other person, right? So that's okay. Already the fact that you feel some stress doesn't mean that you're not capable of doing it. It's just like with giving presentations and with many other things. By practice, the stress becomes less. And at the same time, some stress will remain, and that's okay. Now, what might happen, I don't know if you have this, like this idea of this inner voice, this inner critical voice that might be saying these mean things to you, to yourself, like you're doing lousy, or maybe it's giving advice, but it's doing it in such a way that is actually not reassuring so much. So it's saying it's very important that you stay calm, but doesn't really make you calmer, right? So this is something that happens to lots of people. That's also really interesting to know. We all have an inner critic. One thing, because actually next to all these things I do here, I also am a therapist from body-oriented ways, somatic experiencing. And one of the advices, what can help you both when you're preparing as even during the interview, is looking at something nice. You can do it right now. Like look for a few seconds at my slide, which has a nice plant. I mean, I like it. Or maybe you have something on your desk or where you are now in your environment, and there's something that is nice. If it's a studio interview, yeah, and I feel it myself, because I stopped talking for a moment and I actually looked at my real plant here next to me, and I feel a little breath and I feel something becoming a little bit calmer, right? That's what happens. Your stress doesn't completely disappear, and that's not the purpose, but we kind of balance stressful situation with something resourceful, right? And it can be even if you're in a full television studio with lights on you and there's not so much, it can be the sweater of the journalist, or it can be, I don't know, a little thing somewhere that's helping you. And you can use this also outside of journalist interviews, of course. Yeah, to find something nice to look at outside of your stressful body, where you feel your heart beating and things like that. That's one thing. Now, the other thing, even in your own body, usually the stress is going on here, like in your chest and maybe your belly, shoulders maybe, right? So you can be aware of that. It's not supposed to be completely gone, but you can ask yourself, is there a space in my body which feels less stressed, or which even feels maybe nice? And for me, it's often my feet. I can feel them now, especially then if I put them on the ground, both of them. And my feet are actually usually nice. So when I put a little bit of attention as well on my feet, it also kind of gives me a counterbalance for the stress I might feel elsewhere. So that's also these little things that you can do both while you're preparing and know that in 10 minutes I'm going to be called back by this journalist, and then I need to deliver the quote, or in an hour they're going to be standing here with their cameras, and You know, you can do it beforehand, and you can do it during the interview itself. One last thing you can also do is, and that's maybe especially beforehand, or if it's a phone interview, you can do it while the interview is going on, to move a little bit. Because moving, if you're really almost freezing out of fear, just simply moving your body is also helpful, because it's literally the opposite of freezing, moving, right? Or you can move your feet, or you can do a small movement, or you can move like your head to look around for something nice. So you can combine these things. Okay. So that's a little something. Then something I also need to think about is that you do not need to be speaking the entire time. It's okay to take a little pause. And you can even, good speakers use that, like just before they're going to say something important, or just after, they take a little pause, because then there's more attention to what they've just said, or to what they will be saying right after, right? And also you're allowed to be thinking for a moment. So that's also something interesting. It's also important to not speak too fast. I have sometimes an issue with that. And I think this idea of pausing between the words is sometimes a little bit more easier to apply than speaking less quickly. And these are, of course, things to practice and to be mild also about yourself about. Okay, so maybe one thing to add. So if you have, we all have like spare mind time when we're talking, right? Our thinking goes much faster than our talking. So while you're talking, instead of giving very harsh comments on all the things you should be doing differently, and you can also be kind to yourself and say to yourself, yeah, okay, you got it. Yes, come on. That was a good example, and oh, okay, yeah, at least you're trying it, it's good, right? So use your spare mind to encourage yourself, and also just simply to think about what you're gonna say next, right? That's having this critic. You can train this critic also over time to become a bit more a better coach, instead of somebody who is giving advice but in such a harsh way that it's actually not helping at all, or making things worse. Okay, so that was a little thing on managing stress. Of course, there's so much more to say about it, but limiting it to that. Now, one thing I want to show here, like this fear that you have, but oh, I did not do research in this exact subfield of subfield of subfield where the question is about. So maybe I will then say, no, I won't do the interview. And apparently women have this more often than men, that they think they're not good enough yet. So I would say, if you did a PhD in the research field, realize that you know so much more than the audience does, and probably also so much more than the journalist. And the audience wants, they don't need the person that did this exact research. I mean, if you are aware of all that's happened in your field, or if you're aware of what happens in the field that's literally all out of there, you have so much to offer. So it would be interesting sometimes to hear more diverse voices, right? More different people being interviewed. And journalists are, if they already get to somebody new, it's nice that these people dare to answer. Okay, so if you did a PhD on this field, yes, you are an expert. Yes, you're entitled to do the interview, right? Some encouragement there. Right, so concluding, this was actually my most important slide, telling you that whatever this journalist is doing, they are doing it for the audience. They're doing this to get something good out as an audience, as a researcher. Usually this journalist is really just helping you, reminding you of the audience, of what they understand, of what they find interesting, of what questions they'll have, of what they need. So use them as an ally, and that will probably reduce your stress and help you get to a better result together with this journalist. My 10 tips were these: thinking about taking time making time and buying a little time to prepare, using this preparation time to know, like, okay, what medium, what journalist, what format, what angle, one thing. Secondly, using this time to prepare a newsworthy key message, and maybe also even that key message turned into a good quote. Think about if your topic needs it, but probably it does. Examples, 3 is a good number. Realize that there are specific types of questions, and they don't always mean that the journalist is attacking you or interrupting you for a wrong reason. It really reflects probably what the audience needs. Prepare if you get diverted from a good newsworthy key message, but somehow you do get diverted. Prepare how you can go back and dare to do that, dare to say, oh, this is not what I think is most important. Most important is whoops, and you go back. Avoid saying things you don't want them to use. Simply don't say them. Practice out loud and give yourself a few things on reducing your stress. So this was my advice. So as I mentioned a few times, this is now only 1 hour of advice, which is a very short time to do this. I give a full day workshop on this topic for small groups of about 14 people. So what I do is not a camera training, actually, which is something very specific, which is very worthwhile, but is something very specific. What I do is more like a content training, like how to keep as much control as possible on the content, on the quotes. So what we do during this full day workshop is step-by-step preparing your own interview. I help you, and the group helps you to build your key message with news value. And we look at your quotes. So we typically do group feedback on that. We involve some AI advice, because I haven't talked about that, but of course you can ask AI to also give ideas. We listen during the workshop to some more example interviews with some scientists. And of course, then there is the most interesting part with practice groups, where you practice actually being interviewed and practice to be interviewer yourself, because that's equally interesting often. And then usually with this full day workshop, I also offer an online follow-up session where I interview you. You tell me what medium, what format you're most interested in, maybe what's the most horrible question you always fear they will ask again, and we just practice how to answer it over and over if you want. So that's usually also very, very interesting. And of course, it can be tailored a bit to what you're interested in. So there's my email. I love to hear. I do this for groups, so it's usually institutions or something that can contact me to organize this. And as I said, I also give workshops on science writing, on intercultural communication, and related topics. And I do this both in Dutch and in English, in Belgium, and sometimes also abroad, usually real life, sometimes online. And for Dutch speakers, if I suppose there are quite a few here, I also have written a book which is on writing with impact, so popular science writing. It's in Dutch, and it's on writing. But on writing also, there are these two things that I emphasize here, this idea of from your topic getting to a key message, because that's something we didn't have time today to really analyze how to do that really well. So that's something that the book also talks about more. My workshops also talk about it more. And then again, the pyramid structure, like to reverse the pyramid and to start with your key message and with an interesting hook to that key message. So that's this one thing that I still wanted to share. And it's 1:04, so I think there's time for some questions, Arno.
Indeed. Thanks a lot, Anne. I think it was very interesting. You gave some very concrete tips, and I hope that a lot of the participants here today will use them to engage with journalists and be more confident when engaging with journalists. We have time for some questions now. I already see one from Jérôme Antoine in the Q&A, and he's asking, what would be your advice regarding mentioning figures or numbers during an interview?
Figures and numbers. I would say they can be interesting, and don't overdo it, because it has to do with the amount of apart from figures and numbers. It's in general like the amount of specific complex information that you want to be giving, that it's interesting to dilute it and to mostly think like what is mostly illustrating the key message that I need. What figure or number is really illustrating the point I want to make, and find it in a way also that is relatable for people. There's this typical thing like compare it to I don't know, a soccer field or a needle point, or that the number becomes something understandable, and also don't overdo it. Don't give too many figures. I don't know if that's an answer, or if there was a specific thing about it.
Well, if that's the case, Jérôme can ask a follow-up question.
Yeah.
I see that two participants raised their hand, so I think they want to intervene. So
Okay.
I'm quickly going to allow them to enter the video chat on so that they can raise their question directly. Julie van Bogaert, the floor is yours. Julie? Ah, strange. She didn't raise her hand.
Oh, okay.
That's strange. Okay, then I'll undo it. Yeah, I see some other person, Anne van Neerom, but perhaps it would be more interesting that all the questions are raised in the Q&A. That makes it a bit easier to answer them. And perhaps while waiting for some additional questions, Julie had an interesting comment earlier on. She said, yeah, I don't think that the specific example you gave on is a journalist being mean. It even helps like the researcher, make the researcher more relatable, more human. That gives me the opportunity to plug a new project of ours. We indeed think that it might be interesting to make researchers more human and more relatable. And for this, we are making a podcast in Dutch called Missen is Wenselijk. And in this, we have like 9 Flemish researchers who talk about their research. But for once, they don't talk about their results. They don't talk about their successes, but they were asked to talk about what exactly went wrong in their research. Basically, starting from this idea of, showing that researchers are perhaps very intelligent people, but they're also still human. They also make mistakes. And also to paint like a more complete picture of scientific research, because often when research hits the press, you only hear about these breakthroughs or these big discoveries, and it kind of gives the idea that scientific research follows this straight path, a straight line from like research question to the solution or the answer to that question. But in reality, of course, it's way more complex than that. And to paint that or to give that part of the story as well. I'll perhaps share the link to the first 5 episodes that are available. It's in Dutch, but I'll share it in the chat, and I'll also include it in the follow-up mail. But I think it might be of interest to some of you here. Okay, let's see. I see another question now. Oh, strange. Well, apparently something went wrong accidentally with the raising of hands, because second person also didn't raise her hand voluntarily. Perhaps I have another question then for you, Anne. Well, of course, you gave some very interesting tips on how to really be prepared for an interview, how to already anticipate on certain questions, prepare quotes. But I think, it still might be the case that, afterwards, you feel that your research and that the journalist has like misquoted you or misinterpreted your research. Are there any other ways to kind of prevent this? And perhaps I'll make it more concrete. Sometimes I'll give an interview to a journalist of a newspaper, so it won't be live, it won't be recorded on camera. or audio-wise perhaps, but it will really be written in an article. Do you have any control on this article as a researcher? Can you elaborate on that?
You say prevent, eh? Of course you can make some agreements. I mean, I said on the question, like, can you have the questions? But another question could be like, can I read the interview before it goes to print? Of course, that's something you have to discuss with a journalist. Every journalist has their own idea on that. I know when I was working as a journalist, I used to allow it on very strict conditions. Learning from when I was a starting journalist, that sometimes people tend to want to go change a lot of things that they actually did say, and not because they were wrong, but they on second hand they want to take this back and they want to change that, and that's really making it very hard on the side of the journalist who is doing their job, right? But I would say if it's really about a mistake, me as a journalist, I also have the motivation to bring out something that is correct. So if I really, I mean, there was this question about numbers and figures, and if I say something is 17 and it's actually 27, I'm really happy that you just correct me and that we sort this out before I send it out or before it goes online. So if it's really factual corrections, and if my other condition always used to be, it needs to be really quickly, because when I finish my article, I usually, I mean, deadlines and time is often very, very strict for journalists in a lot of professions, but certainly for journalists, and even more every day, I would say. So when I send it, I can give you a call or we can agree what time, and then I need it back in 10 minutes, because I'm not going to wait that much longer, because we want it out. And so that would be the one thing. Only the factual things, not changing your quotes just because you want to rephrase it on a second idea, just because it sounds better, or you think that you should quote this person instead of not such details, but just the mistake things, and then really quickly on the time that I need it. For me, that was the way I worked. But so you can ask to check things, and you depend on the journalist. Yes, is that an answer, or are you thinking of something else? I don't know.
No, indeed, I think indeed that's an answer. I think it's important to know, because I once talked with researchers who thought that it was their right whenever they gave like an interview to a journalist of newspaper, that he or she was obliged to send them the piece and they had the right to read it before publishing. But that's definitely not the case. So as Anne mentioned, it's really something you have to agree on with the journalist, and indeed try to be empathetic for the journalist. He or she really works with deadline stress. So if you get the opportunity to read the article, make sure that you do it within, as soon as possible, as agreed also with the journalist, so that that process goes well. And perhaps on whenever it does happen, and let's say we're really talking about a factual mistake, something is published and it kind of gives the impression that you as a researcher don't know what you're talking about or made a mistake. Well, it's rather the journalist who made this mistake. Is there any way to correct it afterwards? How would you approach that as a researcher?
I would contact the journalist again, and as I said, it's in their interest. If it's really a factual mistake, it's in their interest also to get out correct information. So if it's a smaller thing, sometimes online they just change it, and if it's important, they will add this little note that something was changed. I mean, I saw it recently. I think, it's on another news item on this boy that was killed, actually just very close here. At first they said 12 years old, then they said 11 years old. In the first correction, there was this little addition that why this mistake happened, and then it was changed in the article. So yes, this is possible.
Yeah.
So contact them. Yeah.
That's also a piece of advice we give to researchers, is do reach out to the journalist whenever something is published and it contains a mistake. Of course, if it's like in a written newspaper, they won't be able to correct it, and they're not very likely to like publish a new article correcting the mistake. But all articles are usually published online, and there, of course, it's really easy for them, and they will often do it quite fast, is like correct the mistake. And I think for you as well, it really is important to do it, because otherwise this information continues to live online. So
yeah,
definitely.
I was indeed mostly thinking about online, where there's a lot of possibility to correct it. And even if there's some things are not possible to correct, but you can nowadays you can also bring out your own information. So you can also add your own correct story to kind of counterbalance what else is out there. And that's also maybe something, because also sometimes you're not even interviewed and there's a story about your research. That can happen as well. As you said before, Arno, they don't need to have you read the article when you give an interview. They don't even have to contact you. If they find somewhere some blog post of you or some social media post, they can also make a story out of that. It's allowed. And so if something is there and it's not somebody, or it's not a medium that wants to correct anything, which I think usually they do, but let's say they don't, then you can also bring out your own story, and then that is also online.
Well, indeed, I think I immediately think of a really nice example. You have this volcanologist. I don't know if you say it like that in English, but Sam Poppe, he's called. And basically, yeah, I don't know how long ago it was, but years ago we had this this Icelandic volcano with the unpronounceable name.
Horrible name, yes.
Erupted, and of course it had a huge impact on air traffic and stuff. So it was all over the news during, I think, a whole week. And yeah, I think that journalists in Belgium didn't realize we had experts in that field, since we don't have any volcanoes here in Belgium. But of course, we do have researchers working on that. And yeah, they just wrote their articles, and it contained a lot of factual mistakes. And what Sam Poppe at that time did was really reach out actively on Twitter at that time, or even via mail, to these journalists, not like pointing the finger at them saying, yeah, you're wrong and you're an idiot, but really more in a cooperative way. It's like, yeah, I read the article, but I have to point out that there's a mistake in it. Actually, it's this. This is the correct information. And he always added the fact that his phone number, that he's an expert on the topic, and he was definitely also interested in commenting on this. And then journalists started reaching out to him, and now whenever there's a volcano erupting somewhere and they need someone, he's one of the experts they call, because they in the meantime also found out that you have other experts such as Kat Wills.
Yeah, that's true. Once you get in the address book of the journalists, you might get called again. That's why I stressed in the beginning that it can be interesting if they at some point get to you to make time, because once you're a contact and you do it kind of good, then you'll be contacted again. And indeed, you can reach out yourself as well, because it's so interesting. Journalists is always, when I was doing that as well, you're just always looking for who can I call, who can I talk to. And of course, that's why they end up often with the same people, because at least they know that these people have something to do with it and might want to say something in a usable way. But they can be very, I mean, it's always very interesting to find new voices, but there's just so little time to find these voices. So if you reach out yourself in such a case, it's a gift to the journalist and to you.
Yeah, definitely. But of course, make sure, as some Poppe did, to not publicly shame them, because that would be counterproductive. But reach out to them and in a collaborative way, and then
they're trying to do the best, but not on everything. They have the same expertise as you, so that's where you can collaborate.
Definitely.